For as much as the story that's being told in this web series is focused on Detective Phil DiNatale, it's important to have a rundown of who the major players are. The police commissioner was Edmund McNamara, Irish fellow in a predominantly Irish department. He was brought in to clean up police corruption, but was also flooded with the gangland murders, where mobsters were turning up dead in their front lawns. This was the start of the Winter Hill Gang and the rise of Whitey Bulger, so the commissioner was in the hot seat. But a little backstory is that he also held a long-time grudge with the DiNatale family, because as Italian minorities on the force with a lot of credentials, there was petty jealousy. Commissioner McNamara was also close with the homicide detectives. This bunch was headed up by John Donovan, a rough-and-tumble cop who, like every detective, wanted to make the pinch on the Boston Strangler so bad he would hold information and mess with the station house detectives. It was a reciprocal relationship throughout departments involved. The station house detectives were the detectives who had a beat and worked in the same neighborhoods. They worked their way up, they were grinders, unlike the high-profile murder-working homicide detectives. You could have smelled the rivalry between the two groups. Donovan and McNamara were buds in the homicide division, and Phil was a station house detective at Division 16. Also at Division 16 was James Mellon, Phil's partner for years, good cop, won awards with Phil, had many pinches with Phil, even dressed as a woman with Phil. But the two eventually came down on opposite sides of the investigation. Phil never held a grudge with Jimmy, and always had a lot of respect for the man. Phil and Mellon were handpicked to work on a special task force called the Strangler Bureau. Lieutenant Andy Tooney, state police detective, dog of an investigator, was brought in to work on the Strangler task force as well, along with Stephen Delaney from Metropolitan Police and Dr. Donald Kennefic, heading up psychiatric aspects. Now, Edward Brooke, handsome, Republican, Attorney General in the Democratic Commonwealth, soon to be the first African-American senator, election quickly approaching, was the sole reason the task force was assembled. He wanted to have the arrest come under his jurisdiction. Brooke was running against John Collins, mayor of Boston, who was also running for the Senate seat. Collins was McNamara's boss, so this created even more animosity because both groups wanted to get the credit for finding the Strangler. John S. Bottomley, Assistant Attorney General assigned to run the Strangler task force for his organizational skills, and was sitting pretty come election time to take over Brooke's seat as Attorney General. Albert DeSalvo grew up in Chelsea, rough childhood, served overseas in Germany, married a German lady, was a Golden Gloves boxer, returned from service, had 2 kids, first arrested for breaking and entering in 1961, best known as a serial rapist and breaking and entering guy, was a handyman who worked all around the greater Boston area, and who was again arrested by Cambridge Police Department in 1964 for B&E. After Phil went to go see DeSalvo and the heat was on, DeSalvo recruited a new hotshot attorney who helped him confess the 13 murders in March of 1965 and brought it to the paper, breaking the case and starting the public conviction of DeSalvo in the papers. Athle Bailey, famed defense attorney coming off the heels of the Dr. Shepard case, which the TV show and later the movie The Fugitive was based off. Bailey was flamboyant and really good at his job. He would arrive to prison and council meetings via jet plane and had the front seat of his car swivel around so he could talk to reporters in his back seat while driving. Dr. James Roby, a psychiatrist at MCI Bridgewater, who Phil believed was somehow in cahoots with Bailey to break the case. Gerald Frank, a journalist from Ohio who was granted complete access to all the files and going-ons of the Strangler Bureau's investigation to write a book, The Boston Strangler. This was an unprecedented move by John Bottomley to allow this type of access to a journalist. His book would later be turned into a movie of the same name, directed by Richard Fleischer and produced by 20th Century Fox. Gene Cole, Loretta McGrath, Harold Banks, and Eddie Corsetti. 4 journalists for the Record American publishing a running series on the murders, listing crime scene details and issuing warnings for the public. In recent years, it's said that the 2 women, Cole and McLaughlin, launched a crusade to expose the insufficiency of Boston homicide, as well as lay out a blueprint for copycat murders. Because the immense coverage of the murders investigation and because there was never a conviction, there are many theories that claim DeSalvo wasn't the Strangler, and these began to make headlines a decade after Phil's death. Susan Kelly wrote a book first published in 1995 with a second printing around the turn of the millennium, firmly and convincingly promoting the thesis that DeSalvo was not the Boston Strangler in lieu of her research. Casey Sherman, nephew of the last murder victim Mary Sullivan, author of the book A Rose for Mary, launching a career in crime writing, Casey successfully claims he found his aunt's real killer through DNA testing of his aunt's body, reinforcing the fact that DeSalvo was not the Strangler. And since Phil's death in 1987 and the insurgence of these alternate theories, my Uncle John has been recreating his father's investigation to combat these theories and defend his dad's investigation. Thus, it has been our intention to publish via this web series Phil's full investigation and perspective on the case.